There is a book so small you could lose it between two fingers. 4.5 centimeters tall, less than 4 wide. Smaller than a matchbox, on parchment so thin it had to be read under glass. For centuries, it lay buried in the sand near an Egyptian town the Greeks once called Lycopolis, until it surfaced, sometime in the last century, through the hands of antique dealers in Cairo. 4 blackened lumps of vellum the size of a palm, crumbling, nearly destroyed. When scholars pried it open, they found a story in ancient Greek. It carried an odd title, On the Origin of His Body, and it told the early life of a man the world had spent more than 1,000 years trying to forget. His name was Mani, and he believed he was the last prophet the world would ever need. To understand him, you have to stand for a moment in the place that made him, southern Mesopotamia, in the year 216 of the Common Era, the floodplain between the Tigris and the Euphrates, in the shadow of the twin cities of Ctesiphon and Seleucia. This was the crossroads of the ancient world. Caravans from India unloaded here. Jewish scholars debated here. Christian missionaries, Zoroastrian priests, Greek philosophers, Babylonian astronomers, all of them passed through, carrying their gods. A boy growing up in that place would have heard a dozen explanations for why the world was broken, and a dozen different names for God, all before he was old enough to choose one. Mani chose all of them. He was raised, according to that tiny codex now held in Cologne, among a Jewish Christian baptizing sect called the Elkosites, a community of strict ritual, constant washing, careful purity. But as a young man, he said, a presence began to visit him. He called it his twin, a celestial companion, a second self, who revealed to him the secret architecture of the universe. And what the twin revealed was this: every prophet before him had told a piece of the truth. Zoroaster in Persia, the Buddha in India, Jesus in the lands of the West. Each had carried one fragment of a single, shattered revelation. And Mani believed he had been chosen to assemble the fragments into a whole. Here's what I find striking about that ambition. He was not trying to start a sect. He was trying to build the first truly universal religion. A faith designed from the beginning to absorb every other faith, to be translated into every language, to cross every border. Most founders want to be right. Mani wanted to be final. And he built the machinery to make it happen. He wrote his own scriptures, 7 of them, in his own hand in Syriac, so that no later council could argue about what he had really meant. The most important he called the living gospel. He illustrated them himself. Later generations would remember Mani not only as a prophet, but as one of the great painters of the ancient world, a man who taught in pictures because pictures crossed languages that words could not. The way I read this, he had studied the failures of the prophets before him and decided their problem was simple. They had trusted other people to write things down. Mani would trust no one. He would leave nothing to memory, nothing to interpretation. He would build a faith that could not be misquoted because he had already quoted it himself. And for a time, the most powerful man in the world let him try. Around the year 240, Mani began to preach openly. He traveled to India and made converts, and when he returned, he was received at the court of the Sasanian Persian Empire by its king, Shapur I, one of the great rulers of the ancient world, a man who had captured a Roman emperor. Mani dedicated a book to him, written in Persian, called the Shaburagan, and Shapur, remarkably, gave him permission to preach throughout the empire. For decades, under royal protection, the religion of light spread along the trade routes faster than almost any belief before. When Shapur died, his successor Hormizd continued the protection. Mani must have believed by then that he had won. He was wrong. And the way I read this, his story turns on a single brutal truth about tolerance, that it is almost never a principle. It is usually just a mood. It lasts exactly as long as the person in power finds it useful, and not one day longer. The mood changed with a man named Bahram. When Bahram I took the Persian throne in the year 271, he came under the influence of a Zoroastrian high priest named Kartir. And Kartir is the figure the official histories tend to leave in the shadows. He was an ambitious cleric building something new, a Zoroastrian state church, with himself near its center. We are not guessing about his ambitions. Kartir carved them into stone. His inscriptions still survive on the rock faces of Persia, where he boasted of driving out the heretics, the Zandics, across the empire. To a man building a single state religion, Mani was the most dangerous thing imaginable, a preacher whose entire message was that all religions were one. So look at who benefited. Bahram needed the priesthood to legitimize a reign that was otherwise unremarkable. Kartir needed a throne to enforce an orthodoxy he could not impose alone. And Mani, the prophet of synthesis, the man who had spent 30 years under royal protection, was suddenly worth more dead than alive to both of them. This wasn't the first time a religious idea died at the exact moment it stopped being convenient to a king, and it would not be the last. The pattern is almost mechanical. A ruler tolerates a faith while it costs him nothing. A cleric builds an institution that requires enemies to define itself. The two interests meet, and somewhere in the middle stands a man whose only crime was believing something inconvenient. We've seen this play out in nearly every century since, under different flags and different gods. Mani simply had the misfortune of standing in that middle ground first. Mani was summoned to the city of Gundeshapur. His arrival, the sources tell us, caused an uproar in the streets. The chroniclers compared it to another preacher entering another city centuries before. He was put on trial. By tradition, it lasted 26 days, and in the year 274, he was thrown in chains and died in prison. What happened to his body afterward, we know only through later accounts, so hold them lightly. They say he was flayed, his skin stuffed with straw and hung above the city gate, a warning, deliberate and grotesque, to anyone who might follow him. His own disciples chose to remember it differently. They called it a crucifixion. They placed his death consciously alongside the death of Christ. Even in their grief, they were doing what Mani had always done, weaving his story into the older stories, making him part of the pattern. Now, there's a temptation to call Manichaeism a religion of pure peace and to leave it there. The truth is more interesting than that. At its heart, the faith asked its most devoted followers, a class called the elect, to harm nothing at all. No meat, no violence, no taking of life, not even the cutting of a living plant. And yet the centuries ahead would see this gentle creed adopted by conquerors and carried by armies. Like every great religion, it could be worn lightly or worn to the bone. It meant one thing to the saint and something else entirely to the king. What strikes me most, standing here at the beginning, is how completely the plan failed and succeeded at the same time. Bahram and Kartir killed the messenger, and they believed the message would die with him. It did not. Within a generation, Mani's followers were in Egypt, in Rome, in North Africa, carrying his books, copying his words, painting his images in gold. The empire that had crushed him would soon find that crushing a man and crushing an idea are two very different kinds of work. A boy from the floodplain between two rivers had looked at a fractured world and decided he could make it whole. He was tortured for it. He was erased for it. His scriptures would be burned again and again for the next 1,000 years by nearly every great power on earth. And still, against all of it, fragments survived. Buried in sand, sealed in caves, hidden inside other people's temples, waiting, like that small book in Cologne, for someone to dig them up and read them again. History doesn't teach us that the gentle inherit the earth. If anything, it teaches us the opposite, that the men who build empires are remembered and the men who question them are buried. But there's a deeper truth at work in Mani's story, and it's the one that should give a person pause. You can kill a prophet in an afternoon. You can flay him and hang his skin above a gate. What you cannot do, what no king has ever quite managed to do, is kill the question he asked. Mani asked whether all the world's gods might be one. 3 empires decided that question was dangerous enough to erase him for, and every one of those empires is gone now. The question is still here. For 9 years, the young man sat among the listeners and believed. He was clever, everyone said so, a teacher of rhetoric, ambitious, restless, hungry for an explanation of the world that could survive his own relentless questioning. And he had found one. He sat in the gatherings of a religion that called its ordinary members hearers, and he was one of them. And the answers it gave him about good and evil satisfied something in him that nothing else had touched. He would not have called it a phase, he called it the truth. His name was Augustine, and one day he would become the most important theologian in the history of Western Christianity. But for 9 years, in the cities of North Africa, he belonged to the religion of a Persian prophet he had never met, a faith his future church would spend centuries trying to burn out of the earth. To understand how a young man in Roman Africa came to follow a preacher executed in Persia, you have to understand how fast this thing moved. Within a few decades of the prophet Mani's death, his missionaries had reached Egypt. By the year 280, they were in Rome itself. They traveled the way merchants traveled, along the same roads, in the same caravans, carrying books instead of silk. And what made the religion so portable was the very thing that made it dangerous. It did not ask you to abandon your old gods, it absorbed them. A Christian could hear Manichaean preaching and recognize Jesus in it. A Zoroastrian could recognize the eternal war of light and darkness. A Buddhist could recognize the cycle of suffering. Everyone who encountered it found a piece of something familiar, and a promise that this, finally, was the whole of which their faith had only been a fragment. That is precisely why the powers of the world came to fear it. And here's what I find telling. They did not fear it as a foreign faith. They feared it as a counterfeit of their own. The first great blow came from Rome, and it came early, before Christianity itself was even the empire's official religion. The Emperor Diocletian, in the year 302, issued an edict against the Manichaeans that survives to this day. We are not reconstructing his attitude from rumor. We have his own words, addressed to his proconsul in Africa, and they drip with something close to disgust. He called the religion a poison out of Persia. He accused its followers of the detestable customs and perverse laws of an enemy people, and he ordered that their leaders be burned alive, together with their scriptures, while their followers were executed or sent to the quarries to be worked to death. There is a detail in that edict worth sitting with. Diocletian did not merely want the Manichaeans dead, he wanted their books dead. The order to burn the scriptures alongside their owners was not an afterthought, it was the point. And this tells you something the prophet Mani had understood better than his enemies. A man can be killed once. A book can be copied 1,000 times. The empire was not fighting a community. It was fighting an idea that had learned to reproduce itself faster than swords could find it, and on some level Diocletian knew it. Why else burn the paper with such care? Look at the logic of that edict, because it tells you everything. Diocletian did not persecute the Manichaeans for what they believed about God. He persecuted them because they came from Persia, Rome's great rival in the East, and a faith that crossed borders so easily looked, to an imperial mind, like an invasion that travelled without an army. The way I read this, Manichaeism was the first religion in history to be treated as a national security threat. Not a heresy, an infiltration. And then, in one of history's stranger turns, the persecution passed from Rome's pagan emperors to Rome's Christian ones, and it never let up. This is the part I find almost unbearable in its irony. The early Christians and the Manichaeans had been hunted by the same emperors, side by side, as twin foreign superstitions. But once Christianity won, once it became the official faith of the empire in the late 4th century, it turned on its old cellmate with a fury it reserved for no one else. The emperors Theodosius and, later, Justinian issued laws of escalating cruelty, confiscation, then exile, then death. And no Christian wrote more words against the religion of light than the man who had once belonged to it. Augustine, that clever young hearer from North Africa, converted, rose, and became a bishop, and then spent the rest of his life dismantling the faith of his youth. The scholar Johannes van Oort, who has devoted decades to the question, argues that Manichaean ideas shaped Augustine's theology far more deeply than the bishop ever admitted. That the architecture of original sin, of the war between flesh and spirit, of two cities locked in eternal struggle, all of it carries the fingerprints of the religion he claimed to have escaped. If that is true, then the most influential thinker in Western Christianity was, in part, a Manichaean who never fully stopped being one. We've seen this before, the convert who hunts his old faith hardest, because the thing he is really trying to kill is the part of it still living inside him. By the year 600, in the lands around the Mediterranean, the religion of light was effectively dead. Hunted by Persians, then pagans, then Christians, its books ash, its leaders executed, its name turned into a synonym for everything Orthodox Christianity despised. It should have been the end. It was not. Because while the West was busy burning Mani's books, his missionaries had been walking east the whole time. And in the east, something happened that no one in Rome could have imagined. Look at who saved it. Not a martyr, not a hidden saint. An empire of mounted warriors on the steppes of Central Asia. In the year 762, the ruler of the Uyghur Khaganate, a confederation of Turkic nomads who were, at that moment, the most powerful steppe empire on earth, met 4 Manichaean priests in the Chinese city of Luoyang, where his armies had come to help crush a rebellion. His name was Bogu Kagan, and after 3 days of discussion, he did something extraordinary. He converted. He took the priests back to his capital on the Mongolian plateau, and he declared Manichaeism, this gentle, vegetarian, pacifist faith of the elect, the official state religion of an empire built on cavalry and conquest. Notice what's missing from the official story of how religions spread. We are taught they spread by the sword or by the comfort they offer the poor. But the religion of light spread along the Silk Road the way money spreads, carried by Sogdian merchants who ran the trade routes, who needed a faith as cosmopolitan as their business, one that crossed every border because they crossed every border too. The Uyghur conversion was not only spiritual. It was a declaration of independence, a way of telling the great Tang dynasty next door that the Uyghurs would kneel to no one's gods but their own chosen ones. Faith here
was also foreign policy. For one shining century, the religion that Rome had tried to erase had a kingdom of its own. Its scriptures were copied in gold on the steps. Its temples rose where there had been only tents. The prophet executed in a Persian prison was honored as a living presence in the courts of warlords who could field 100,000 horsemen. This wasn't the first time a hunted faith found refuge at the very edge of the world it had been expelled from, and it is a pattern worth holding on to. Persecution does not simply destroy a religion. It selects for the ones that can move. The faiths that survive their first century of fire are almost never the ones with the strongest armies or the deepest roots. They are the ones light enough to travel, flexible enough to wear a new culture like a coat, and humble enough to take shelter wherever a door happens to open. Mani had built exactly that kind of religion, perhaps without knowing it. He had made something that could not be cornered, because it had never agreed to stand still. What strikes me most about this whole long chase is how the religion survived by refusing to belong to anyone. It had no homeland to be conquered, no single temple to be razed, no king whose death could end it. When Rome closed in, it went east. When the Mediterranean turned hostile, it found the steppe. It was the first truly stateless faith, and that statelessness was both its curse and its armor. You cannot besiege a religion that lives in the saddlebags of merchants. But empires on the steppe rise and fall like weather. The Uyghur kingdom would not last, and when it broke apart, the followers of the light would be exiles once again, forced to run one final time, deeper east than any of them had ever gone, into the one civilization vast enough and old enough
to swallow them whole, and strange enough to let them disappear inside it completely. Here is a question that has unsettled historians for the better part of a century. When the man who founded one of China's greatest dynasties chose its name, when he reached for a single word to define an empire that would last 300 years, why did he choose the word for light? The dynasty was the Ming. In Chinese, the character means bright, radiant, luminous. And there is a theory, argued most forcefully by the historian Wu Han in the 20th century, that the choice was not poetic at all, that it was a confession, that the rebels who toppled the Mongols and raised the Ming to power had carried in their banners and their hearts the last embers of a Persian prophet's faith, that the religion of light did not merely survive in China, it helped build an empire there and then watched that empire erase it. Most historians today are more cautious than Wu Han was, and we should be too. But before we weigh the theory, we have to follow the road that makes it even thinkable, because the story of how Mani's faith reached China is one of the strangest acts of survival in the history of religion. When the Uyghur kingdom on the steppes collapsed in the 9th century, the followers of the light were exiles once more. They fled in the only direction left to them, east and south, into China itself. And there, in the 10th century, after the fall of the great Tang dynasty, a Manichaean preacher carried the faith into the coastal province of Fujian, fleeing persecution in the north. He traveled the province, made converts, and died there. His burial ground became a center of something new. The religion of Mani had arrived in the one civilization vast enough to hide in. And hide is exactly what it did. To survive in China, the faith performed the most remarkable disappearing act of its long life. It took on the colors of the religions around it. It borrowed the vocabulary of Buddhism and the rituals of Taoism. Mani himself, the prophet flayed in a Persian prison, was quietly reimagined as a Buddha. The Chinese called the religion Mingjiao, the religion of light, and they distilled its sprawling theology down to 4 words carved in stone: purity, light, power, wisdom. To an outsider walking past one of its shrines, there was nothing foreign to see. Just another temple, another serene figure seated in meditation, another local variation on the Buddha. The disguise was the doctrine now. To be seen clearly was to die. There is something almost tender in the details that survive from this period. In the year 1979, archaeologists working near the coast unearthed a simple glazed bowl, and on it, someone long ago had scratched 3 characters: Society of the Religion of Light. A bowl. Not a sword, not a banner, not a monument, a piece of household pottery, marked in secret by a believer who needed to know which cup belonged to the faithful. Notice what that tells you about how this religion actually lived. It was not a thing of palaces by then. It was a thing of kitchens and back rooms, of quiet recognitions between neighbors, of a mark on a bowl that meant, "You are one of us, and no one else needs to know." Here's what I find extraordinary about that choice. Every other branch of this religion had been destroyed by standing visible, by refusing to be anything other than itself. The Roman branch was burned for being Persian. The Persian branch was crushed for being heretical. But the Chinese branch survived by agreeing, in effect, to stop being recognizably Manichaean at all. It is one of the deepest questions a persecuted faith ever has to answer. What is the point of surviving if the price of survival is becoming unrecognizable to yourself? Which brings us back to the rebellion and to Wu Han's unsettling theory. By the 14th century, China groaned under the rule of the Mongol Yuan dynasty, and the countryside seethed with secret societies and millenarian dreams. Out of that ferment came the Red Turban Rebellion, a sprawling uprising whose followers spoke of the coming of a king of light. Among the streams that fed it were the White Lotus movement, with its prophecies of a future Buddha, old Confucian loyalties, Taoist mysticism, and, woven somewhere into the mix, the imagery of Mingjiao, the religion of light. From the chaos of that rebellion rose a peasant named Zhu Yuanzhang, who would defeat every rival, expel the Mongols, and in the year 1368 found the Ming dynasty. He even borrowed in part the title King of Light from a rebel leader before him. Now, look at who benefited from the story afterward, because that is where the caution comes in. Most modern scholars do not believe the Red Turbans were essentially a Manichaean cult. The dominant flavor of their faith was White Lotus Buddhism, and the name Ming carried other meanings too: fire, the color red, the south, all set against the dark north of the Mongols. The way I read the evidence, Mani's faith was one thread in that banner, not the whole cloth. But it was a thread. The word remained. And here is the irony that Wu Han could not resist, and neither can I. Whatever Mingjiao's exact role in raising the Ming, the new emperor turned on it with ferocious speed. He outlawed the religion of light. He wrote draconian penalties into the legal code. The faith that may have helped name his dynasty was hunted by the very power it helped create. We've seen this pattern in every chapter of this story. The prophet protected by Shapur and killed by Bahram. The religion sheltered by Christians and then burned by them. The light was always most dangerous to the people who had just finished using it. So the religion did what it always did. It went deeper underground. It sank into the hills of Fujian and the folk traditions of the coast, syncretizing so completely that even its own worshippers eventually forgot what they were worshipping. And there is one artifact that captures the whole thousand-year story in a single, quiet image. South of the city of Quanzhou, at the foot of a hill, stands a small stone temple called Caoan, the thatched hut. It is the only Manichaean temple left standing anywhere on Earth. Inside, carved into the rock in the year 1339, sits a statue. To a casual visitor, it looks like a Buddha, but the experts notice the differences. The straight hair falling over the shoulders, the beard, the features that no ordinary Buddha would have. It is Mani, the world's only surviving statue of the prophet, hiding in plain sight inside the body of another god. What I think this statue really is, when you stand back from it, is the entire history of the religion compressed into stone. A prophet who tried to contain all faiths, now contained inside one of them. A man who wanted to be seen by the whole world, surviving only because no one could see him clearly. The sculptor who carved those telltale features, the hair, the beard, knew exactly what he was doing. He was leaving a signal for anyone who knew how to read it, a secret hidden inside a public face. The light, even at the very end, was still finding ways to send its message past the people who wanted it gone. And then there is the detail that I cannot stop thinking about. A poet visited Caoan around the year 1600 and wrote about what he saw. He described the Buddhist symbols, he described the Taoist ones, and he showed no awareness whatsoever that the temple had ever been Manichaean. The disguise had become so perfect that even an educated visitor, standing inside the last temple of the religion of light, could not see it. The faith had not been destroyed. It had been forgotten, which, for an idea, is a stranger and lonelier kind of death. So let me leave you with the question this whole story was always circling. They were hunted by Persians, by Romans, by Christians, by the emperors of China. They survived 1,000 years of fire, not by winning, but by running, by bending, by disappearing into other people's temples. And in the end, they were erased not by an enemy's sword, but by simple forgetting. Mani wanted to build the one religion that could never be misquoted, never be lost. What strikes me, standing at the end of his long road, is that he may have built something more durable than that, and more tragic. A faith that could survive anything except being remembered. History doesn't teach us that the gentle and the true are the ones who endure. It teaches us, again and again, that we remember the names of the conquerors and lose the names of the dreamers. Mani is one of the lost ones, and the only reason we can speak his name at all is that a few fragments, a tiny book in the sand, a bearded Buddha in a forgotten hut, refused, against every odd, to vanish completely. The candle burns low, the questions don't. Until we meet again, stay curious.